Today we have some very exciting recent news about the far side of the moon. We have a fascinating new study from Harvard, we're going to talk about moonquakes, and a whole bunch of other reasons why the moon is actually more dangerous than you might think. And we're starting things off with some news that actually just came out the other day. Possible hidden structures on the far side of the moon. How exciting is that, right? China's Chang'e 6 rover spotted these buried structures, and news about the study came out in the Journal of Geophysical Research, Planets, which stated the GPR sends electromagnetic pulses into the lunar interior and receives echoes from the subsurface layers. We use the high-frequency channel data to detect the structure of the upper 40 meters along the rover's path, primarily consisting of rock debris and soil. Through this investigation, we have discovered multiple layers in the upper 300 meters, which likely indicate a series of basalt eruptions that occurred billions of years ago. So basically, the moon may have looked very different billions of years ago, because it would have had volcanoes. That is pretty awesome, but this also goes to show that there could be other stuff below the surface of the moon, perhaps something more ominous than the remnants of billion-year-old volcanoes. And it looks like I'm not the only one wondering if there could be something lurking beneath the surface. On to the next point. A new paper by Harvard University's Human Flourishing program discussed the possibility of an alien base hidden inside the moon, and in this base, there could be a number of aircraft used to quickly transport the beings down to Earth in order to continue their research or whatever the hell else they could be doing. I mean, we've talked about this kind of thing plenty of times, but it's pretty interesting to see academics from Harvard discussing it. The purpose of this paper was to give a possible explanation for all the UAP sightings that seem to be cropping up more and more in recent years, and the idea that extraterrestrials could be closer to Earth than we may think, with a base hidden right on our very own moon. It definitely makes the increase in UFO or UAP sightings more understandable. Next, I want to discuss something else that was brought up in this paper, the term crypto-terrestrial. This part dives into exactly what type of being may be operating the UAPs and possibly living hidden among us on Earth or even on the moon. The paper discusses 4 theories. The first are what we call human crypto-terrestrials. This theory suggests that a technologically advanced ancient human civilization once existed, but was most likely wiped out by a disaster like a massive flood, but that some remnants of the civilization continue to survive in secret, living in stealth among us today. Then there's the hominid or theropod crypto-terrestrial theory, that a non-human terrestrial species evolved to become technologically advanced and chose to live in hiding, possibly underground. These could be ape-like hominid descendants, we're talking like Bigfoot, Sasquatch type creatures, or even, according to this paper, intelligent descendants of dinosaurs. That's pretty wild. The third is former extraterrestrial or extratemporal crypto-terrestrials. These would be your classic idea of aliens, beings that might have come to Earth from out in space. And lastly, this one gets really crazy, magical crypto-terrestrials, and this is exactly what it sounds like. Basically mystical or magical beings that exist on Earth but remained hidden from human view. Now, we often talk about the potential dangers of intelligent life out in space, but what about wildlife, particularly underwater? Now, I know what you're thinking, there is no water on the moon. Well, it turns out there might be, and before these potential waters are explored remotely with rovers, manned missions may be getting put on hold in order to avoid any potential dangers. The darkest spots on the moon are its poles, and a number of scientists do speculate that there could be water or ice in these areas that could be useful to manned missions in the future. Nick Estes is the Science Operations Manager for ShadowCam, which is a NASA instrument being used to map out the darker areas of the moon. Now, he thinks there may very well be water up there, and where there's water, there's often life. At least that's what we see here on Earth, so who knows what kind of creatures could be swimming around on the moon. There's not as much protection against space debris on the moon as there is on Earth. In fact, there really is none, and this is also quite a problem. Micrometeorites are tiny particles of rock and metal that zip through space, and even though they're small, they can cause damage when they collide with something because of how fast they move, sometimes at speeds of tens of thousands of miles per hour. Now on Earth, we're protected from these micrometeorites by our atmosphere. When they enter the atmosphere, they burn up and create what we see as shooting stars. But the moon doesn't have an atmosphere to provide this kind of protection. So micrometeorites hit the lunar surface directly. For astronauts and their equipment, this is a big deal. Imagine one of these things flying into a spacesuit. The impact could be strong enough to puncture it, and that wouldn't be good. They could also, of course, damage equipment, so having a lunar base set up isn't as easy as it might seem. Maybe that's why the aliens built theirs below the surface. In part 1, I discussed the possibility of astronauts contaminating places we visit, like the moon, or places we might visit, like Mars. But what about the opposite? Us possibly bringing something back to Earth from the moon. We've never done any prolonged missions up there, so who knows what kind of deadly pathogens could be lurking on the moon that are just invisible to the naked eye. When we think about deadly pathogens, we're usually talking about viruses, bacteria, or other microorganisms that can cause disease. On Earth, we've seen how dangerous these can be, but what about on the moon? Even though the moon isn't known to support life, there's still some concern about pathogens. First of all, who knows if germs brought from Earth could interact with the moon in some unexpected way and possibly even mutate. Then we bring that stuff back to Earth and have some problems. There could also be microorganisms already on the moon, and if they were to be brought back, we could have a deadly situation on our hands as well. Fortunately, NASA does have strict quarantine procedures for astronauts returning from space, though, but you never know. Speaking of the moon getting you sick, let's talk about lunar hay fever. This was something astronauts described feeling on the Apollo missions. Lunar hay fever is a term used by astronauts to describe their reaction to lunar dust. When Apollo astronauts visited the moon, they found that the fine, powdery dust on the lunar surface could be a real problem. When astronauts return to their lunar module after a moonwalk, they often bring this dust in with them. The dust sticks to their suits, and because it's so fine and sharp, it gets into everything. Once inside the lunar module, the dust can become airborne and be inhaled. Now, we talked about this in part 1 already, but I didn't really get into the first-hand accounts of what this stuff can do and the effect it would have on their bodies. Astronauts reported symptoms similar to hay fever, sneezing, nasal congestion, sore throats, and even itchy eyes. This reaction was due to the dust being extremely coarse and abrasive. All these tiny little sharp particles caused physical irritation. Astronauts would often describe the inside of the spacecraft smelling like burnt gunpowder because of all the lunar dust. But lunar dust may be more than just an annoyance. Like, who knows what health risks there are when inhaling these particles over long periods of time. The dust is not only sharp, but it's very small, so it can get deep into the lungs and potentially linger there for a long time. Kim Priss, a pulmonary physiologist from the University of California, stated that, quote, particles 50 times smaller than a human hair can hang around for months inside your lungs. The longer the particle stays, the greater the chance for toxic effects. So that's a lot of fun. Astronauts also have to worry about moonquakes. These are exactly what they sound like. They're basically the moon's version of earthquakes. The moon doesn't have tectonic plates like Earth, but it still has quakes. They're just caused by different things. You have a few different categories of moonquakes. There are deep moonquakes. These occur about 500 to 750 miles below the surface and are actually caused by tidal forces from Earth's gravity, which is kind of cool. You have shallow moonquakes. These happen closer to the surface and can be much stronger. These are the most similar to the types of quakes we have here on Earth. These ones are the most concerning. Some have reached up to 5.7 on the Richter scale, and to put that into perspective, that's strong enough to cause damage to buildings if it were to happen on Earth. And obviously, meteorite impacts will also cause tremors. So I probably don't really need to explain why moonquakes could be a problem for future crewed missions to the moon, especially more prolonged ones. It seems like the moon also just doesn't really like our company very much. It's slowly distancing itself from us day by day. It gets about 3.8 centimeters further away every year. Now, this may not be a reason as to why NASA hasn't been back to the place in decades, but it is sort of an unsettling fact about the moon. Now, 3.8 centimeters per year may not sound like very much, but over time it can have some significant effects. The moon's gravity is the main force behind Earth's tides. As the moon moves further away, its gravitational pull on Earth weakens. This means our tides will become less dramatic. High tides won't be as high, low tides won't be as low, which can and will have an effect on ecosystems on coastlines. The moon also helps stabilize Earth's axial tilt. This tilt is responsible for our seasons. Without the moon's help, Earth's tilt could vary more wildly, which would lead to extreme changes in climate and seasons and make our weather patterns even less predictable than they are now. And finally, we gotta talk about the big elephant in the room, that maybe NASA hasn't done another crewed mission to the moon in decades because we never even went in the first place. Yes, the whole moon landing was a hoax conspiracy. Now, personally, I don't think the moon landing was a hoax. I have more faith in humanity and our abilities, and I just find this conspiracy just kind of pessimistic. But it is a conspiracy that's talked about a lot, even in the comments of part 1, so I'm bringing it up now. The idea here is that, of course, it's pretty simple. The space race was in full swing. The Soviets and the USA were desperate to prove their technological superiority, but both being unable to make a moon landing happen, one country decided to head to a soundstage and fake the whole thing. Some even say Stanley Kubrick directed the moon landing footage himself. Well, we gotta start off with what everyone kinda hopes to be the case. Aliens. Either aliens that pose a threat to our safety that we want to stay away from, or aliens that the government wants to cover up. One theory is that during Apollo missions, astronauts encountered extraterrestrial beings or evidence of their existence on the moon. And if that is true, it's pretty awesome for one, but would also have some pretty serious implications for humanity. Implications that NASA and the government may have figured we just weren't ready for yet. Some believe that governments and space agencies have deliberately kept this information from the public to avoid widespread panic. They may have also found advanced technology on the moon they didn't want falling into the wrong hands. There have been testimonies from former astronauts hinting at unexplained encounters, and that's not even mentioning all the supposed whistleblower accounts about secretive government operations with extraterrestrials here on Earth. So the fear of exposing such a big secret may be one reason why astronauts haven't returned to the moon in such a long time. If we really do end up returning in 2026 though, maybe some secrets will finally be revealed, but sadly, I doubt it. So, speaking of the possibility of strange structures on the moon and possible alien encounters, enter Scott Waring. Scott Waring, an enthusiast in all things extraterrestrial, has posted tons of videos and images of things he's spotted in images and videos, including stuff on the moon. He's posted tons of videos on YouTube where he zooms in on lunar craters, pointing out strange shapes that he insists don't fit the bill as just natural rock formations. He thinks they look like structures or even spacecraft. One of his finds is a curious formation in the Zeeman crater on the far side of the moon. It looks to be a rectangular type of shape, almost too perfect to be anything but artificial, according to him anyway. Waring and other conspiracy theorists have speculated that it could be an entrance to an underground alien base. It kind of looks like steps there, right? Waring also alleges that some of these structures he's identified mysteriously vanish from future scans of Google Moon, making him think things are being covered up. Either the images are getting scrubbed from Google, or the objects are mobile in some way and are just flying away or like closing up. But are these just cases of the human brain perceiving familiar patterns or shapes where none actually exist? I gotta say, in most of these cases, I think so. I do believe there are aliens out there. I also think there's a high probability they've interacted with us, but I'm not too sure they have bases set up on the moon. But what do you guys think? Let's talk more about mysterious objects and structures on the moon. Anyway, though, maybe you'll be convinced. Could astronauts have come across alien structures or artifacts on the moon in previous missions, remnants of some ancient civilization or evidence of extraterrestrial activity up there? There have been other anomalies captured in photographs from the Apollo missions, unusual shapes and formations that look to be artificial rather than natural. Again, if stuff like this was found, governments and space agencies might be hesitant about returning to the moon out of fear of what they might find. Uncovering evidence of past or present extraterrestrial civilizations could be dangerous. We may just not want to poke the bear until we're ready to deal with it, which is why we haven't had a plan in motion to return until now. One example of odd structures on the moon is this image here, which was taken on an Apollo mission. Formation is often referred to as the castle. This is probably the image that got most people thinking about possible alien structures on the moon. It does kind of look like three pillars or columns holding up what looks to be a tower. And what's intriguing is that this structure looks brighter than its surroundings. So again, what do you think? Is this just a trick of the light, or could it be something more? Here's a weird one. So anyone a fan here of mystery goo? Feel like that's something you want to mess with? No? Well, apparently there's some on the moon. China's U-2 rover, part of the Chang'e 4 mission, made a strange discovery on the far side of the moon. It was a weird jelly-like substance. This strange material was found inside a small crater called von Karman, and it looked different from the usual dusty lunar soil surrounding it. The rover stumbled on it when it was busy exploring the moon's surface using its visible and near-infrared spectrometer, or VNIS. And we're not entirely sure what this stuff is. Scientists have thrown around a few ideas, of course. Some think it could be glass that melted when a space rock crashed into the moon, but it could also be alien spit. I'll just say alien spit. I want to go further with that, but you know. The U-2 rover started poking around on the moon in 2019, collecting data on the far side where astronauts have never set foot, and that just makes this discovery a lot more interesting. Another possibility about why we haven't gone back to the moon in such a long time is that astronauts could have encountered unforeseen hazards or some other type of phenomena during previous missions. Something that's not necessarily alien, just strange. Space is, of course, full of dangers, from radiation and microgravity to meteoroid impacts and solar storms. It's possible that Apollo astronauts encountered threats beyond what they were prepared for, and quite possibly beyond what they could even explain. So this one is a bit more esoteric, I know, but I'm just throwing some ideas out there. They may have seen something they just couldn't wrap their heads around. Horrifying, but beyond recognition, almost Lovecraftian. Something that made them never want to return. Of course, other than that though, there are the more well-documented dangers, like the harrowing experiences of Apollo 13, which narrowly avoided disaster after an oxygen tank explosion. There are also the long-term effects of space travel on human health, like radiation exposure and bone loss. If astronauts encountered unknown dangers or phenomena on the moon, space agencies would obviously be a lot more cautious going forward. So maybe they prioritized unmanned missions for that very reason. Here's a more cynical idea though. Maybe the moon holds strategic importance for military purposes. Maybe landing on the moon wasn't as much about humanity reaching the stars as it was about gaining control over a valuable piece of rock. I mean, the space race was happening during the Cold War, after all. The Soviets and the US were desperate to get up there. Could there be covert operations that have been going on the moon? Could the moon be in the process of militarization? Advancements in technology have made space-based weapons and surveillance capabilities very feasible. If governments have indeed set up military installations on the moon or are planning to do so, the implications would be huge. And because of how sensitive military operations are and the potential for for geopolitical tension, governments may be reluctant to publicly come forward and disclose their activities up there on the moon, not wanting to reveal any classified information. Probably the most likely explanation for me, though, is this one: money. The allure of returning to the moon is, of course, undeniable, but I mean, it all comes down to what's practical in the end, right? Funding is one of the main challenges for space exploration in general. There have been advances in space technology, but the cost and complexity of lunar exploration are still big obstacles, particularly for cash-strapped space agencies facing competing priorities and budgetary constraints. Developing the necessary spacecraft, habitats, the propulsion systems for long lunar missions requires a lot of investment and innovation. The long-term sustainability of, say, a lunar base is a big obstacle, because I mean, why go back to the moon if all we're going to do is look around again? The goal is always to take things another step forward, and at this point it would be establishing an actual base up there, and politics come into play. I'll get more into politics in a minute, but political priorities shift and the public's interest in moon missions can also influence governments' funding for space exploration. In recent years, there has been a growing awareness as well of the potential impact of human activities on the moon and even Mars. Scientists and policymakers are getting more concerned about the risk of contaminating the lunar environment with all of Earth's little microbes or disrupting delicate ecosystems that may exist up there. There's no doubt that if we keep going the direction we are, that one day we'll colonize the moon and Mars, but we need to develop protocols and regulations to try and minimize the risk of biological contamination. If we don't, there could be big problems. Politics, they get in the way of everything. As more countries get involved in space exploration, working together becomes even more important. But tensions between countries and different national interests can make forming partnerships tough. Issues like who owns the technology, how resources are shared, and how information is exchanged can all cause problems, especially among countries with their own space plans. To make moon missions successful and space exploration in general more successful, countries need to get along. Conflicts will need to be avoided, and we have to put aside our petty squabbles and finally come together as one unified force, because I mean, the deeper we get into space, who knows what we're gonna find. But last on the list, we have moon dust, aka lunar regolith, which covers the moon's surface like a fine, powdery blanket. Dust doesn't sound very intimidating, but it can be, at least on the moon. Unlike the dust you find on stuff like that waffle maker, that person who barely knew you, got you for a Secret Santa 4 years ago that you only used once, moon dust is a different form of dust. It's not even dust. It's these tiny, sharp grains of sand. It's formed over billions of years from meteoroid impacts, and because the moon lacks any weather erosion, it just stays jagged. So this lunar dust can be a bit of a problem. Anakin Skywalker would hate moon dust. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere. But it's more than just annoying and inconvenient. Moon dust can mess up spacesuits, spacecraft, and machinery, potentially causing damage or malfunctions, and accidentally inhaling moon dust would be very dangerous. Moon dust can cause all sorts of respiratory issues. All right, we're starting off this list with a recent discovery of possible hidden structures on the far side of the moon. Now, this isn't necessarily scary, it's just kind of cool, but who doesn't like cool stuff, right? Scientists have examined data from China's Chang'e 4 lunar satellite, which is exploring the far side of the moon. By using ground-penetrating radar, they have detected echoes beneath the lunar surface, possibly indicating hidden underground structures. The anomalies that have been spotted suggest there could be a series of networks and tunnels or lava tubes underneath the moon's exterior. These subsurface formations could offer shielding against temperature fluctuations and cosmic radiation, making them good options for future human habitation on the moon, because, who wouldn't want to leave the luscious forests and bright blue sky right here on Earth to go live in tunnels deep beneath a dark, desolate, rocky mass. Number 9, the strange substance. China's Yutu-2 rover, a part of the Chang'e 4's mission, discovered an unusual gel-like substance on the far side of the moon. The rover came across this material in the von Karman crater. It was found within a small impact impact crater with the substance appearance and color standing out from the surrounding lunar soil. The discovery was made during the rover's exploration of the lunar surface using its visible and near-infrared spectrometer, or VNIS. But as to what the substance is, we're still not 100% certain. Several possibilities were proposed by scientists, including the idea that it could be melted glass formed by the heat of a meteorite impact, or it might be linked to the moon's volcanic activity. The U-2 rover had been active since early 2019, conducting various scientific observations on that far side of the moon. Number 8, the Mystery Cube. In 2021, China's U-2 rover was traversing the moon when it spotted this far off in the distance, this image here. People were pretty confused when this image was released, saying it looked like there was some kind of hut or like cube on the surface of the moon. For a while, we weren't sure what this object was. Was it an alien spacecraft? Was it some kind of ancient shack? A monolith, similar to the one in 2001, A Space Odyssey, perhaps? I do hate to disappoint you all, but the answer is far less fantastical than all those wild ideas. On closer inspection, it turned out that this mysterious cube was nothing but a rock. It's a moon rock, so it's still something. It's apparently really huge too, but not a highly advanced space cube. In fact, it wasn't even in the shape of a cube at all, but for a while people's imaginations were acting up. And we're back to China's U-2 rover again with another discovery. This time, 2 mysterious glass spheres were spotted on the far side of the moon. These objects stuck out like a sore thumb as they glistened against the dry, dusty landscape of the moon's surface. It was an odd find because the objects looked perfectly spherical. They almost looked like a pair of large glass candle holders, at least to me anyway. Scientists aren't sure exactly how these formed, but they hypothesize they could have been created from like a high-speed impact with a meteorite. Number 6, the UFO. This incident occurred on the Apollo 16 mission, NASA's 5th successful trip to the moon. After the Apollo 16 mission, astronauts John Young, Thomas Mattingly, and Charles Duke were beginning their return trip when they captured about 4 seconds of footage, and in it, they spotted whatever this is. It appears to be a saucer-like object hovering above the moon. Looks like a UFO to me, like a classic UFO, I might add. Looks like something right out of a 1950s B-movie, and it's got that like dome shape. The footage was shot with a 16mm motion picture camera, shooting at 12 frames per second from a command service module window. I've always wanted to have a UFO experience, and going to space, also a dream. Be a little bit scary, but I still want to do it. So, I don't know, spotting something like this while on a return trip from the moon, I would just never be able to stop talking about it. I very much want the world of Star Trek to be a reality, so seeing an alien spacecraft, that's a step in the right direction, unless they mean to do us harm, but I don't like to think about that. Next up, we have alien bases. So Scott Waring is an extraterrestrial researcher, self-proclaimed. He's definitely an enthusiast, though. He's made some pretty bold claims about the presence of alien life, including moon-related stuff. He has tons of videos zooming into craters on the moon, spotting strange shapes that he describes looking like structures or crafts of some kind, too out of place to be natural rock formations. He's claimed that many of the structures he's spotted have conveniently disappeared on subsequent scans of Google Moon, which, according to him, points to the fact that some of these things are being erased in order to hide the truth from the public. One of his finds is this strange shape here, though, found on the far side of the moon in the Zeeman crater. Certainly an interesting formation. It looks to be perfectly rectangular, almost like it could be an entrance to some sort of underground base, which is exactly what he and other conspiracy theorists believe it to be. What do you think, though? Is this just a natural formation, a case of paranoia, or could this actually be some sort of alien or man-made structure? Pareidolia, by the way. Is it a case of pareidolia, not paranoia? Anyway. And that's going to bring us to number 4 with the alien craft. This is another strange image that Scott Waring pointed out. Between Von Karman and Davison crater, it lies this. Waring believes that this is an extraterrestrial spacecraft. Writing on his blog, I found this structure in the center of a crater on Earth's moon. The structure closely resembles a ship from the Transformers movie. The craft is triangular in shape, but with a lot of odd bulges. The object is very shiny, more so than anything in its surrounding area, which tells me it's metallic. He went on to say, I feel this craft may still be salvageable and possibly could be used to transport humans to other planets in the Milky Way. So Scott certainly gathered a lot of info from this image of a rock. I mean, an alien spacecraft, sorry. But he is an extraterrestrial researcher after all. All I can say is I'd love it if he were right, but that just looks like a rock to me. It's a cool looking rock. It's got some nifty grooves in it, and kind of spaceship looking in shape maybe, but I'm not sold on it. I don't know. What do you all think though? At number 3, we have moon dust. Now, this is found all over the moon, not just on the far side, but it is pretty dangerous and, might I say, terrifying. Moon dust, also known as lunar regolith, is a fine powdery substance covering the moon's surface. It's composed of tiny particles created by the impact of meteoroids over billions of years. And now the thing is, it's called dust, but it's not as innocuous as the dust we have here on Earth. Moon dust is sharp, it's abrasive, and it's highly reactive due to the lack of weathering and erosion on the moon. It clings to equipment, which could potentially cause damage to spacesuits, spacecraft, and machinery. Inhaling or ingesting moon dust would be absolutely hazardous to human health, as it causes like respiratory and other health issues. Not that you'd be breathing without a helmet on the moon anyway, but it does pose a challenge for maintaining equipment and could lead to mechanical failures. And during the Apollo missions, astronauts reported difficulties with moon dust sticking to their spacesuits, which raised concerns about potential long-term health risks. And at second place, we have the castle. This image here was taken on an Apollo mission. Gotta say, pretty weird. Now, just like with a lot of other stuff on this list, this could just be a case of pareidolia, but it really does look like some sort of structure. There appear to be 3 support columns holding up some kind of tower. Another interesting part about this thing is that it's much brighter than the surrounding area, although that could just be a trick of the light. I really try not to let my imagination get too out of control looking at stuff like this, because I just really want there to be definitive proof of alien life, but I think it's important to keep a level head and look at this stuff objectively. So I'm just throwing it out there to you guys, to see what you all think. Once again, what are your thoughts on this? That's what the comments are for. And coming in at number 1, we have Transient Lunar Phenomenon. Transient Lunar Phenomenon, or TLP for short, are unexplained and temporary changes observed on the surface of the moon. The strange phenomena has intrigued astronomers for centuries. One common TLP involves the sudden appearance of glowing or colored patches on the moon, which can last for minutes or even hours before fading away. Scientists have proposed a number of theories to explain these weird glowing shapes, but none have been fully confirmed. One hypothesis suggests that outgassing, the release of gas from beneath the moon's surface, might be responsible. This gas could escape because of geological activity or meteorite impacts. Energy released from the impact of a meteorite could create a temporary glow or eject material that reflects sunlight. But this theory doesn't account for the duration and the varied nature of TLP. And some TLP reports date back to the 18th century, and they're hard to study because they're so unpredictable. We don't really just know when it's going to flare up. Astronomers are using advanced technology to try and document and explain what's going on here, but at this point, we still don't know. The Apollo 11 mission, the first time astronauts landed on the moon. Is there more to the story than what we've been told though? Don't worry, I'm not getting into fake moon landing conspiracies. Instead, I'm talking about something strange that happened on the moon that was never officially publicized. In 1969, Neil Armstrong and lunar module pilot Buzz Aldrin reported receiving these strange radio signals while they were on the moon. The signals were unlike anything they'd encountered before, and NASA has never fully explained what these signals were or what caused them. The astronauts themselves were concerned enough to report the signals, but all we've been given are vague explanations about, quote, space interference or static. But could the signals have been coming from from something else. Some believe these signals could have come from extraterrestrials, possibly even a signal that was coming from something on the moon, or some type of craft that was observing the astronauts. No one's been able to definitively figure out where these signals came from. Were they just random radio waves bouncing off space debris, or something more mysterious? NASA has always been pretty dismissive about it, and sure, maybe it was nothing. It's also very possible they just had no explanation. Over the years, there have been tons of photos of the lunar surface taken by the Apollo missions. Well, some folks have pointed out some rather strange things in some of these images, bizarre formations. Images that appear to show what look like pyramids, domes, or even straight lines in the soil. NASA has always insisted these are just optical illusions, products of shadows or rocky outcrops that we just misidentify, but a lot of these formations have sharp angles and their symmetry just seems so precise. It really makes you wonder if they could have been built intentionally. And if that is the case, then what's the deal? Why are they there? Were they built by some ancient civilization that used to live on the moon? That would be pretty cool, definitely something worth looking into. So why hasn't NASA done anything to explore these supposed structures in more detail? Well, maybe there's nothing there, or maybe they're just hiding something from us. Astronomers and conspiracy theorists have pored over Apollo mission photos, and some believe that these structures are evidence of something much larger than what we're being told. But we might find out more in the very near future, with the Artemis 3 mission on the horizon, set to be the first crewed lunar landing since Apollo 17 in 1972. But was Apollo 17 really the last time astronauts set foot on the moon? Next, we have Apollo 20. Wasn't Apollo 20 cancelled? Well, let's explore that for a minute. For decades, there's been a rumor that the Apollo program continued long after Apollo 17. Some conspiracy theorists believe that Apollo 20 actually did happen, and that they allegedly flew to the moon in the late 70s. The mission, of course, wasn't made public. It was a secret operation. But why? Well, because there was something up there that needed to be explored further, but they didn't want to reveal anything to the public in fear of causing panic. Supposedly, during this mission, astronauts were studying evidence of alien contact on the moon. They allegedly discovered this huge abandoned spacecraft and some sort of base or outpost that appeared to be much older than any human structures. The astronauts reportedly even brought back alien artifacts. But the craziest part is that, so the story goes, they also found the bodies of two extraterrestrials in the craft, one of which they dubbed the Mona Lisa. NASA has, of course, never acknowledged this. One of the most popular theories surrounding the moon is that it's hollow. The theory became widely known after the Apollo missions, when astronauts during Apollo 12 dropped a large object onto the surface to test the moon's seismic activity. They reported this strange ringing sound. Apparently the moon rang like a bell for over an hour, as if it were hollow inside. NASA has explained this by claiming that the moon's internal structure is just different from Earth's, to dumb it down significantly, but some people still find this strange. The explanation doesn't really account for the ringing that was recorded. One article from 1970 even described it sounding almost like a gong. So what the hell happened? Could it really be that the moon has a hollow core? There are even conspiracies that the moon was placed there intentionally and is some kind of artificial object. This hollow theory has never been properly investigated, at least not that we know of. But this isn't the only sign that the moon could be hollow, or at least partially hollow. So this is a more recent one. Scientists working with China's Chang'e 4 mission had been studying the far side of the moon, and they found something interesting beneath the surface. Using ground-penetrating radar, they detected strange echoes, as if there were hollowed out sections underground. Now, I don't want to jump to conclusions, but I will make quite a leap here. Does this mean there could be hidden underground structures on the moon? Well, maybe, but what's a lot more likely is that, at the very least, there could be tunnels or lava tubes down there, and that's pretty cool because tunnels could be very beneficial for future moon missions. For example, lava tubes could protect astronauts from the moon's extreme temperature swings and radiation from space. On the surface, temperatures fluctuate. During the day, it can be 250 degrees Fahrenheit or 121 Celsius, and at night, it can drop all the way down to minus 280 Fahrenheit or minus 133 Celsius. That's just an unhinged fluctuation in temperature. Underground, though, things are a lot more stable. So setting up shop underground would be a much better bet. And if there are already hollowed out sections, much easier. Setting up base in a natural underground structure rather than building everything from scratch is ideal, especially when you're going to transport everything out to, the moon. Imagine lugging a huge drill up into space. Speaking of the hollow moon and hidden structures, a recent paper from Harvard University's Human Flourishing program came out with a pretty wild idea that there might indeed be an alien base hidden on the moon. The study proposed that this base could house spacecraft designed for quick trips to Earth. The idea is that extraterrestrials could be using these ships to come here for research or who knows what else. Now, of course, we've all heard ideas like this before, but it is interesting that this came out of Harvard, not just some random dude on Reddit. The research also ties into the growing number of UAP, unidentified aerial phenomenon sightings, that are being reported more lately. With more and more of these reports of strange objects in the sky, the idea that an alien base could be hidden on the moon starts to sound a little less ludicrous. If extraterrestrials are really this close, it could explain why we're seeing so much stuff in the sky these days. Many astronauts have reported seeing strange glowing spots or lights on the surface of the moon. These aren't just simple reflections or optical illusions, but bright, unexplained glows that appear to move or change shape. Some of these glows were reported during Apollo missions, but they've also been seen by people on Earth looking at the moon through powerful telescopes. NASA has mostly dismissed these reports as either solar reflection or lunar gas emissions, but could there be something else going on? The lights are often seen in areas where there shouldn't be any reflective material. And it's especially odd when they show up near particularly large craters, because, maybe there's something built into those craters. So what could these strange glows be? Are they evidence of alien technology? Are people just overthinking things? Go ahead and make fun of me down in the comments. Next up, we have crypto-terrestrials. What on earth is a crypto-terrestrial, you ask? Well, the term was actually coined in that same Harvard paper that I mentioned before. The term crypto-terrestrial is used to describe the beings that could be living on the moon or even right here on Earth. The paper lays out 4 theories about what these crypto-terrestrials might be. The first theory is called human crypto-terrestrials. This one suggests that a super advanced human civilization once existed a long time ago. It was almost entirely wiped out by some kind of disaster, like a massive flood. But some survivors of this ancient civilization might still be around, living secretly among us. Next is the hominid or theropod crypto-terrestrial theory. This is a non-human species, something like a descendant of apes or dinosaurs that evolved to become highly advanced but chose to live in hiding, possibly underground. This idea kind of touches on cryptids like Bigfoot or creatures similar to ancient theropods. The third theory is what's referred to as former extraterrestrial or extratemporal crypto-terrestrials. This is really just a fancy way of describing